"Hold the cross high, so I may see it through the flames." These are the haunting final words uttered by our cross-dressing female patron saint of France. The notorious Maid of Orléans, or more widely known as Joan of Arc, is perhaps one of the most controversial characters in all French history. Her story, shrouded in mystery, still finds us questioning more than 600 years later. Was she merely a mentally ill young girl whose delusions led to her tragic end? Or was she a true visionary who received information from the divine, resulting in her becoming the prolific hero of the French nation, altering the very fabric of this nation's history forever? On this day in history, we take a closer look. What conclusion does her story provide? In order to better understand the events catapulted into motion by her life, we must understand the backdrop against which her story plays out. Joan of Arc, also known as Jehanne la Pucelle, Joan the Maid, or Jehanette, among various other possible names she bore, was born around 1412 in the village of Domrémy in northeastern France to Father Jacques d'Arc, or so we believe he is called, a tenant farmer, and mother Isabelle Romée. Joan was born into a France that had been actively engaged in a war against England for more than 75 years at the point of her birth. This war was later known as the famous 100-Year War. England was succeeding against France, and by 1420, Charles of Valois had lost the throne to Henry V, who was crowned as King of England and France, succeeded by Henry VI in 1422. At this point, much of northern France was occupied by England. It is in this setting that the important events of Joan's life play out. Call it destiny, or call it insanity, but Joan became a prolific player in the events that were about to dramatically alter the course of French history as we know it. At the age of 13, Joan, who had developed a deep allegiance to the Catholic faith from her mother, allegedly began hearing supernatural voices. Joan claims to have heard from the Archangel Michael and Saint Catherine. The messages given to her by those she claims to have heard from led her to believe that she was chosen by God to lead France into battle and succeed against the English, thereby helping Charles VII regain the throne of France. Joan took a vow of chastity as part of the destiny she believed she was to fulfill. At the age of 16, she thus rejected a marriage her father had attempted to arrange for her. In May 1428, Joan began her divine mission as she arrived at Vaucouleurs, where she was at first rejected by the local magistrate Robert de Baudricot, who later gave in to her persistence. This is the moment where Joan made her cross-dressing debut. Knowing that she would not be respected as a woman in the patriarchal military world she was attempting to infiltrate, she thus cut her hair and donned men's clothing as she embarked on an 11-day journey through enemy territory, finally arriving in Chinon, home of Charles VII's palace. After some private conversations with the then Prince Charles VII, in which Joan disclosed information to him that she had no way of knowing except through divine intervention, she won Charles's allegiance, and he believed her when she said she would ensure his victory over the English and his crowning as rightful King of France. Joan also developed quite a following, as she appeared to be the fulfillment of a well-known prophecy at the time of a female virgin whom God had chosen to lead France into victory. Joan asked Charles for an army which she could lead into battle to fend off the English siege of Orléans. He granted her wish, which saw a teenage Joan riding into battle in March of 1429 on a white horse dressed in white armor. She proceeded to lead her army into battle against the Anglo-Burgundians in the area of Orléans, driving them back and finally claiming the victory over them. Soon after this victory, Joan and her followers led Charles VII through Reims, taking many towns along the way. This journey culminated in the crowning of Charles VII in July 1429 as King of France. Joan had succeeded in fulfilling the promise she had made to Charles, and with it, she had claimed victory for her beloved France. However, despite the victory Joan had won, the events that were about to take place did not bode well for her. These ill-fared events would propel her forward, urging her towards her tragic destiny. In 1430, King Charles VII, ordered Joan to lead an army against the Burgundian assault on Compiègne. She heeded his instructions, but this battle was to be the beginning of the end for France's heroine. Joan fell from her horse in battle and was left vulnerable outside the town's gates, where she was captured by the Burgundians and brought to the castle at Bouvral, which was under English rule. Joan stood trial and had to answer to the 70 charges brought against her, including heresy, witchcraft, and the then heinous crime of dressing like a man. These charges were aimed at ruining her reputation and discrediting Charles and his recent claim to the throne. Thus, for fear of losing the crown, Charles did not defend Joan. In the year that followed, Joan remained in captivity. Many of the charges were dropped, including that of witchcraft. However, it would be her one major crime, that of dressing as a man, which would ultimately lead to her demise. In May 1430, she signed a confession in which she denied having encountered divine interaction. However, a few days later, she again claimed to hear supernatural voices which beckoned her to once more wear men's clothing, and upon this deed, the proclamation of her death sentence. Thus, on May 30, 1431, Joan, who was a mere 19 years old, strained her eyes to see the cross through the flames as she was burned at the stake. Born 600 years too early, Joan was tried and executed for actions that today would have gone unnoticed. A woman who defied the norms of the patriarchal society to which she had the misfortune of being born into, redemption for her came too late when at last her name was cleared by Charles VII some 20 years later, whereupon he finally developed the courage to redeem her reputation through a trial which he reopened. Later, her bravery and courage in the face of opposition earned her much acclaim as she was canonized by Pope Benedict XV in 1920 and named the patron saint of France. It is believed by some that her ashes were scattered in the river Seine, and thus her spirit is still carried along by perpetual ebb and flow of these waters. Whether or not this rings true, her legacy lives on in the reality of French liberty and the ever-present mark she etched into French history. And so, the question echoes on and teases us for all perpetuity. Delusional juvenile whose rantings led to a pointless death, or divinely inspired warrior heroine of France whose martyrdom should be admired as she fought valiantly and stood by her convictions even until the point of death? Or is there in fact the need to accurately answer this question? For what bearing does it have on the reality of the contribution to history made by our famous cross-dressing saint?